The GOP ran 17 candidates at the start of this contest. It was hailed as the deepest bench ever. 4 sitting governors, 5 former governors, 4 sitting U.S. senators, 2 Iowa caucus winners, roughly 140 years of combined elected experience. And Trump blew it all apart, waging the ultimate divide-and-conquer primary strategy that has largely rejected generations of party orthodoxy. The dust is still settling, but here's where things stand. There's no sugarcoating it. The Republican Party's presumptive nominee begins this general election campaign as the party's weakest candidate in nearly a generation. We have the numbers to back that up. More on that later. And then there was this late today. The Speaker of the House, the leading Republican in the party, Paul Ryan, said he is, quote, not ready to support or endorse Donald Trump. Ryan says that Trump has work to do on his part in order to unify the party. At the same time, the GOP is scrambling to address a nightmare scenario for down-ballot contests, and perhaps Ryan was saying what he said to provide cover for House Republicans. More on that later. But Democrats are now doubling the number of Senate seats they believe they can target and potentially flip with Trump at the top of the GOP ticket. At its most basic level, the Republican Party got here thanks to a combination of structural and demographic stresses that later crumbled under the weight of a series of branding and communication failures under its party leadership. This took a generation to create. It didn't happen in 1 year or one campaign. And one of the party's biggest issues, ironically, comes from too much success. You could start with gerrymandering and and what they've done to the congressional districts. The party basically drew diversity out of their districts to the point that now 95% of all Republican House districts are majority white. The result, many Republicans don't have diverse constituencies, which means they don't need to appeal to minorities or swing voters. It's heavily partisan and monolithic districts like that where compromising becomes a liability and gridlock, which is now called standing on principle, ends up being rewarded. These are the conditions that have bred many of the bigger problems the party faces today in a presidential environment. It's also fed a media bubble that has basically put talk radio on TV, creating a booming yet narrowly targeted feedback loop. And it's also made the general election very hard for Republicans to win, so that's why for much of the base, Mitt Romney and John McCain's losses get reinforced that their view that the best way to win was via conservative purity. But McCain and Romney might argue that they lost because of how the base has damaged the party's brand nationally. And it's also bred isolationism and has choked off attempts to remedy the party's structural problems. Look at immigration reform and voting rights. Would there be a Donald Trump today if some form of immigration reform passed in 2013 with the Gang of Eight, or in 2010 when Democrats controlled anything? And folks, it's hard to fix your struggles with African-American voters if they believe you're passing laws that they think are designed with the explicit intent to prevent them from voting. It's all connected. And we're only getting at the top of this. You insulate the party base, and it's no wonder there is palpable backlash and rejection of social and demographic changes nationally. So when these forces come to a head with the election of the first black president, maybe it's not a surprise that it's met with a conservative backlash that some say spiraled into a blind rage. In addition to gridlock, it gives rise to wild conspiracy theories, like the birther movement. And to make matters worse, all of these tensions are aggravated by a stagnant economy. These are some of the conditions that have driven the Republican Party to the brink and, more importantly, allowed Trump to thrive. He filled this vacuum. He is the ultimate anti-Obama. He quickly became the most prominent birther 4 years ago. He has intensely been aggressive with his views on immigration, everything from deporting millions of immigrants to choking off Muslim immigration. He is a master of the media, and he promises to have a panacea for an ailing economy. To Trump's credit, he saw early where the Republican Party could be headed, and he dominated. But boy, oh boy, has he alienated some big names inside the party along the way. Take a listen.
His candidacy is a cancer on conservatism, and it must be clearly diagnosed, excised, and discarded.
He is a con artist.
The delusional narcissist and an orange-faced windbag.
He is the Kim Kardashian of politics.
Donald Trump is a narcissist and he's an egomaniac.
Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot.
This man is a pathological liar, a narcissist at a level I don't think this country's ever seen. Morality does not exist for him.
So in addition to those folks you saw there, Trump may also have dismantled Reagan's three-legged stool for the Republican Party: social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, and national security conservatives. Trump's views are being attacked or he's alienated leaders from all of those three parts of the party. We're now at the point where it is exceedingly difficult to define even what is the Republican base, or what is the Republican base in the era of Trump. What does that mean anymore? So let's bring in our first of many panels this hour. Scotty Nell Hughes, she's a Trump surrogate and a political editor for RightAlerts.com. Senior CNBC contributor Larry Kudlow, and Michael Steele, the former spokesman for House Speaker John Boehner. So let me start with you, Scotty, and ask you this: what turned you off of the Republican Party and on to Donald Trump?
Well, it goes back farther than just this election season. You have to realize we have had a do-nothing Congress that many of us within the grassroots worked very hard to get elected in 2010, 2012, 2014. And what do we have to show for it? In fact, there's actually more frustrations. I am not surprised at all that Mr. Trump captured the hearts and soul of the grassroots, the silent majority this election season. In fact, I'm really shocked at those people that thought that they were going to continue to be able to dominate a party that had become stagnant and had stopped being able to relate. Barack Obama anybody could have won in 2008 as long as they did not have an R by their name because of the excessive spending of the Republican Party. That did not stop in 2010, 2012, 2014. So for anybody who's surprised about this rise of Donald Trump, they obviously have not been paying very much attention to the constituency of the Republican Party.
Larry, I'm going to get to you in a second, but Michael Steele, you worked for that Republican Congress that Scotty says that she and others worked so hard to get your former boss, John Boehner, into the speakership. Respond to Scotty and what she said.
Well, I think we have a constitutional republic. We have a limit to the powers granted to the legislature, the powers granted to the executive. Republicans in Congress did everything humanly possible to achieve the goals of the members and of the people who elected them. Repeal Obamacare, cut spending, reform the tax code. Every one of those efforts came to a cropper, not because of anything that Republicans in Congress did, but because ultimately the veto pen was wielded by President Obama.
Larry, you come from a day, Scotty, I know you want to jump in there, but Larry, you come from a time where you watched Ronald Reagan work with a Democratic Congress. They could have easily ended up in shutdown territories numerous times. They didn't. The idea of getting 60 to 70% of what you want was a win. What happened?
Well, look, I worked for Reagan. I was a budget deputy. By the way, we did have several shutdowns, just for the record.
You did? That's right.
Yes, we did. And
smaller
by the way,
ones.
Reagan didn't win them all, but he won a whole bunch of them. And to my friend Michael Steele, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of John Boehner. He's been a personal friend of mine for over 30 years. Nonetheless, Scotty has it right. The seeds of the Trump candidacy, at least many of them, were put in place because the Congress didn't do anything. Now, particularly, Michael, you mentioned tax reform. Come on, buddy. Nothing has happened with tax reform. That's my area. I have been yelling and screaming for a flat personal tax, as you probably know, and most of all, a sharp reduction in the business tax for large and small companies, which I believe would be the single largest growth stimulant and wage stimulant and job stimulant to this economy. You all didn't push reconciliation. Okay, now, I don't want to go into the weeds. It just means 51 votes, 51 votes in the Senate. You don't need 60, you need 51. David Stockman and I don't know how many years ago, I don't even want to think about it, we used reconciliation time and time again, won most of those battles. All I'm saying is, Trump's got, he wants to cut taxes, he wants to cut spending, he wants to lower regulations. He's basically right on target as far as the economy is concerned. And the Congress, the GOP, did not do what we elected them to do. And even if you lose to Obama, even if he's going to veto stuff, you still have to make a run at him. You still have to show the folks that you're doing the best you can.
All right, let me let Michael respond here. I didn't plan on poor Michael Steele being the punching bag here. But go ahead and respond to Larry.
Well, I think Mr. Kudlow knows that if you look at the budgets written by House Speaker Ryan, passed by the House, passed by the Senate. They include a tax reform principles exactly like the ones that you're proposing. If you look at what Dave Camp talked about for years as chairman of Ways and Means, the draft that he put forward, what we've done or what we did as House Republicans and later Senate majority.
All right, but Scotty, let me okay, but I don't want this. I want to go back to Trump.
You got to be aggressive.
Well, I want to go back.
The whole point here is, now let's just close it. We never had a reconciliation battle. We never got stuff through both the House and the Senate. The Speaker of the House is a dear, dear friend of mine. My God, Paul Ryan, I've known him forever. I love the guy, and I love what his policies are. But he would tell me time and time again, we'll never get it through the Senate. The Senate Majority Leader McConnell won't do it. Well, my point is, fine. Your job is to go across there and give them hell to get stuff through.
But let me go,
That's very important.
Scotty, let me go to this. You're a Trump surrogate. Trump, in many ways, I think one of the reasons why he sells to some is he brags about, hey, I will cut deals. I'll be a deal maker. Now, I find this a little ironic because obviously the problem was nobody knew how to cut a deal between Obama and Boehner, okay? Nobody knew when to give. Nobody knew when to, and we can go through, I'm not going to go through the history of that. Are you going to be okay as a conservative, Scotty, if he cuts a deal that only gets 70% of what he wants?
Let me tell you this. There's a difference between compromise and capitulation. And this Congress has been a capitulating type of Congress where they just totally give in to everything. We see there's one budget finally that is passed where the Republicans maybe get a list that I can count on one hand and the Democrats got everything they want. And you sit there and you go, wait a minute. So you know what? Yes, 70% will be considered a win considering we've gotten literally 5% of what we've wanted with a Republican Congress so far. And, you started off, Chuck, talking about, these different House and senators that are worried about their seats. Good. That's not Mr. Trump's fault. If you are worried about a record turnout in Republican numbers and they're going to vote you out of office, maybe you need to assess your own voting record and say, was I really reflective of the people I was elected to represent?
Well, let me just add to this. First of all, I want to defend John Boehner on this one. Boehner had a good budget deal in 2011. And Obama walked away from it literally at the last minute on a weekend where he jacked up the tax revenues by $400 billion.
It was a bipartisan group of U.S. senators, Republicans and Democrats, Mr. Kudlow, that came up with that deal.
But look, I'm not against bipartisanship. I'm just saying they had a deal. Boehner was the lead.
Boehner and Obama got close to a deal. You're right.
Obama walked out of the deal on a Friday night or a Saturday morning. So I'll give Boehner some credit on this. Come back to your question about 60 or 7%. I don't know how many times I heard Reagan in the Oval Office running through budget battles. He said, you give me half a loaf now, I'll get the second half later. Or he said, you give me 70% now, I want the 30% later. The 30% is not my enemy if we agree 70% of the time. With respect to Mr. Trump, he has a great history as a businessman of making deals. And I believe with the force of his personality and the strength of his policies, he would be excellent. And he would get that 70%. And we'll all live much more happily ever if he does.